start with this. Set to make her professional debut, Australian amateur standout Skye Nicholson will be taking on Jessica Juarez. Originally, she was supposed to be fighting Canada's own.
She was supposed to be facing unbeaten Bree Howling.
But according to Skye Nicholson herself, Bree Howling pulled out of the fight for reasons that are unknown to us at this time. Bree Howling, who sported a professional record of 3 wins, no losses, and no draws. Jessica Juarez,
same kind of record.
A different kettle of fish. You'll have heard me say this before. There's more to boxing than what you see on paper. Jessica Juarez is an unbeaten up-and-comer the same way Bree Howling is an unbeaten up-and-comer, the same way that Skye Nicholson is an unbeaten up-and-comer. Though comparatively, I have to say that Bree Howling looked a lot more put together than Jessica Juarez does.
There were holes there.
Areas of opportunity for Skye Nicholson to capitalize on tomorrow night. Defensively,
I don't think Jessica's a bad fighter.
I think she's a young fighter that has some things she needs to work on. It's the strangest thing because even though Bree Howling is the one that pulled out of the Skye Nicholson fight, Jessica Juarez is the one who decided to stand in her place. Bree Howling seems a bit more put together than Jessica does. The work is tidier, the punches snappier. Bree Howling's punches. Both girls are 3-0 as professionals, but Bree Howling's 3-0 looks a lot different than Jessica Juarez's 3-0. Against Jessica Juarez, I think Skye Nicholson's going to have the edge in speed. I think she's going to have...
I think she's going to be able to beat Jessica Juarez to the punch.
Skye Nicholson, fresh out of the amateurs, that Olympic amateur style, very bouncy, fighting in bursts, putting punches together. I think
that coupled with her speed.
I think she's going to beat Jessica Juarez to the punch. I think she's going to beat her to the punch at every turn. I think her bouncy amateur style, in unison with the gaping holes in Jessica Juarez's guard, I think it creates an environment to where perhaps Skye Nicholson can get the stoppage, though conservatively, Skye Nicholson on points would be the logical way to go. So I'm going to go with Skye Nicholson to win a points decision tomorrow night on the undercard of what's supposed to be Chocolatito versus Martinez. I think Jessica Juarez is a solid opponent choice for a professional debut. Make no mistake, it's a solid choice, just not as solid as Bree Howling, though all the same.
There are worse girls to make your pro debut with.
Ultimately, Jessica Juarez is 3-0 as a professional. She's a solid choice, an ambitious choice for Skye Nicholson.
And I think Skye wins on points.
We then come to the main event of that same card. What was supposed to be the super flyweight contest between Chocolatito, Roman Gonzalez against Julio Cesar Martinez, who missed the weight by a significant margin, 2 pounds. And bear in mind, he's the fighter that's supposed to be moving up in weight. The fight itself tomorrow night was supposed to be for the WBC Diamond super flyweight belt, with the winner becoming the mandatory challenger to face WBC franchise champion Juan Francisco Estrada next. Jesse Bam Rodriguez holds the standard WBC world title in the division. You heard that right. The WBC continues to create confusion with these titles and designations.
I thought franchise champions didn't have mandatories.
Hey, you know the WBC makes up these rules as they go along. Dougie Fisher tweeted, Team Chocolatito is willing to go through with the fight, but if Martinez blows a commission-mandated fight date weigh-in, and the California State Athletic Commission will have to cancel the fight per their rules.
Well, I don't think Julio Cesar Martinez can win that WBC Diamond belt.
No, because he blew the weight, and that Mando spot only appears to be on the line for Chocolatito, who managed to make it. Chocolatito, the consummate professional. ESPN's Salvador Rodriguez tweeted, for this Saturday, Ray Martinez must be weighed in again at 9 a.m. and must not weigh more than 125 pounds as agreed by the teams. He had 6 weeks to prepare for the duel against Chocolatito. In any case, it will be a screaming duel. They've placed a rehydration cap, what appears to be a rehydration clause, for Ray Martinez to allow the contest to go on, and I think it will.
Yeah, I don't want to scrap the whole goddamn thing altogether.
Though this places serious doubts on my perception of the match. The fact that Julio Cesar Martinez decided to stand in for Juan Francisco Estrada, who was not performing up to scratch due to what were described as post-COVID symptoms. Julio Cesar Martinez stepped in to save the day, salvaged the card, but now he has placed the fight in jeopardy.
And what does this mean in terms of performance?
He blew the weight. Has Julio Cesar Martinez, the fighter who was supposed to be moving up in weight, moving up to super flyweight, has he spent all this time in fat camp? And if he has, what will that mean the night of the fight? What will that result in? Will he be depleted?
I just don't know what to make of this.
It is so obviously unprofessional that Julio Cesar Martinez blew the weight by such a wide margin. It is, but the fight appears to be going on, all things considered. And if it does, what does all of this mean in terms of performance for Julio? Because we know who the more experienced fighter in the fight is. We know who's better on the inside, at least on paper. That would be Gonzalez, Chocolatito.
My heart is with Chocolatito, but my head is with Julio Cesar Martinez.
I feel like what we might see tomorrow night is a changing of the guard, similar to what we saw very recently when Bam Rodriguez moved up in weight to take on Carlos Cuadras.
Been seeing a lot of established names getting beat.
Mark Magsayo beat Gary Russell. Fernando Martinez beat Jerwin Ancajas. Bam Rodriguez beat Carlos Cuadras. I mean, you're seeing it. You're seeing it.
The young gunners are here.
My pick for tomorrow night's fight has less to do with nuts and bolts and less to do with the sweet science and more to do with the changing of the guard, because these established names at super flyweight, they're not getting any younger.
A lot of established names in a lot of divisions aren't getting any younger.
And you're seeing what's going on. It's been close to a year, just a couple of days, short of a year.
Yeah, it's been about a year since Chocolatito last fought.
He's 34 years old, already a 4-division champion, very accomplished.
Though not very active, not the last 12 months.
And I think tomorrow night we're going to see the effects of that. I think Father Time is set to catch up to Chocolatito. There are very few fairy tale endings in the sport of boxing, and this...
I'd love to see Chocolatito's career go on.
Would love to see Chocolatito win tomorrow night's fight, move on from this, and go straight into that Juan Francisco Estrada trilogy. That third fight, I would love for that to be the case, and if that ends up being the case, I'll be very happy about it. I won't complain.
I'd be lying to you if I told you I think that's what's going to happen.
I think Julio Cesar Martinez is going to emerge the victor tomorrow night. By hook or by crook, I'm going with Martinez. In lightweight news, I'm sure that most of you have heard by now. Javonte Davis versus Romero fight is set to be rescheduled for June 4th on Showtime pay-per-view. I think this comes as a surprise to no one. We know the gory details. We know that there were some accusations made in reference to sexual misconduct on the part of Romero, and that resulted in him being pulled from the fight, pulled from the card. Isaac Cruz stood in his place, and Isaac Cruz lost a decision. I'll tell you what I think.
Didn't I tell you Davis was never in the running for Camboso's fight?
He never was. That was never the plan. That was never the trajectory for Javonte Davis's career or his next fight. They were always going to revisit the Romero fight, and here we are. And should Javonte Davis make it through this fight, I've no doubts they'll revisit the Isaac Cruz fight.
They'll do a rematch.
A report last month indicated that they'd made a fight between Isaac Cruz and Yuriorkis Gamboa. You heard that right.
Supposed to be going down in April on the 16th.
On the undercard of Spence versus Ugas.
I wasn't surprised by that either.
Immediately after the Davis fight, the Golden Boy Promotions people expressed an interest in making an Isaac Cruz versus Ryan Garcia fight for what was Ryan Garcia's big ring return. We know that things didn't work out. We know that didn't materialize. That didn't happen.
And that didn't surprise me.
Actually made an offer to Cruz, $1 million offer, way more than what he got paid for Tank, and way more than what he was going to make against who he's fighting now, Gamboa. So the fact that they did not give him the offer, it's not my fault.
What we've got is a bona fide case of he said, she said, ladies and gentlemen, and for what it's worth, I believe what Oscar said. I believe Oscar's side of things. I can believe that the people over there at Golden Boy Promotions and DAZN were willing to give Isaac Cruz $1 million place for that fight, because that fight does very well on the West Coast with the Chicano fans. Believe you me, Ryan Garcia versus Isaac Cruz would have done better numbers than Isaac Cruz versus Javonte Davis.
All the ingredients are there.
An American fighter of Mexican descent, a Chicano fighter versus a Mexican national on the West Coast, that fight does numbers.
It would have.
But it was too good to be true. It didn't materialize, and if I'm being honest, I never expected it to.
Isaac Cruz is being wrapped in the same protective bubble that Javonte Davis has been wrapped in.
The same bubble wrap, the same racket, the same shtick, the same gimmick. It's the same thing, and they're keeping him on standby for what could be a rematch with Javonte Davis should Javonte make it through Romero. That's what's going on.
Why else would they reject an offer to fight Ryan Garcia for Yuriorkis Gamboa?
Why fight on an undercard for a couple $100,000 against a faded fighter when you can headline against Ryan Garcia for a 7-figure purse?
I believe Oscar.
And I believe that Isaac Cruz and Javonte Davis may as well be in a different weight class, different division, to George Kambosos, to Devin Haney, really any lightweight that isn't a PBC lightweight. These guys, they're on an island. I've been telling you the whole time.
So does Davis versus Romero do better numbers than Davis versus Cruz did?
Well, listen, the paying public wasn't asking for either of those fights, and they're still not. But because the bar for the Cruz fight was so exceptionally low,
A pay-per-view with a late replacement that nobody knows.
on a Sunday going head-to-head with the NFL,
Whose bright idea was that?
whatever the numbers were for the Javonte Davis versus Isaac Cruz pay-per-view, those numbers likely won't be that hard to beat, that hard to outperform, because that pay-per-view did abysmal numbers.
Bar for that pay-per-view was exceptionally low.
So maybe this pay-per-view will do a little better than that one did. Maybe this one will outperform that one.
But don't expect anything astronomical, because nobody's asking for this fight either.
They weren't asking for it before, and they're not asking for it now. Most boxing fans that even know who Rolly Romero is, they don't have a high opinion of him or his boxing. So why would they want to pay $80 to see him fight?
Maybe if it were Davis versus Ryan Garcia, or Davis versus Haney.
Davis versus this guy for $80 Are you kidding me?
No gracias.
And just in keeping with the theme of all things PBC, that same card we just talked about where Isaac Cruz is set to make an appearance, Spence said ahead of what's supposed to be the Spence versus Ugas fight, we'll see.
See what?
About fighting Terrence Crawford after the Ugas fight in April 16th. He said, we'll see. Like I said, I've got to get past Ugas first. So once I get past him, we'll definitely see.
See what?
More of the same. Spence then opened his jacket and pointed to his shirt, which featured the words, strap season, Spence's mantra. But like I said, Spence continued, you read the shirt, right?
Hollow words on cheap fabric.
That whole strap season shtick's been little more than a gimmick.
I mean, he is in a unification match.
You guys know how I feel about it. The Errol Spence Jr. that sits before us here today is not the Errol Spence Jr. of old, the Errol Spence that traveled to Sheffield to pry away the red belt from Kell Brock. Another reporter asked the 32-year-old Spence during the press conference if owning 3 of the 4 titles would make him the shot caller in the division, to which he replied, well, I've been the shot caller, so nah, wouldn't matter, Spence replied. I've been the shot caller, you know? Like I said, I'm the big fish, especially at 147, so no, that doesn't matter at all.
There is some truth to that.
Some. No welterweight, quite like Errol Spence Jr., has put up the viewing figures, the pay-per-view numbers that he has. The problem is, it was a long time ago.
Ever since he debuted on pay-per-view, his numbers have been going down.
He didn't do with Sean what he did with Mikey, and he didn't do with Danny what he did with Sean.
To date, the Mikey Garcia fight put up the best pay-per-view numbers for Errol Spence.
You'll notice that this is a Showtime pay-per-view and not a Fox pay-per-view. Errol Spence Jr.'s last 2 pay-per-view appearances were on Fox, whereas this fight has drifted back to Showtime.
One would think that if Errol Spence Jr. really is a big draw, Fox would want to stay in the Errol Spence Jr. business.
One would think. I think it took a lot of people by surprise that Fox chose to see out the entirety of their deal with the PBC for what is this 4th year. Though beyond that, I don't imagine that Fox is going to stay in the sport of boxing. I don't. We haven't gotten a comprehensive schedule of fights by way of Fox.
Most people thought that Canelo versus Plant was going to land on Fox, and it went to Showtime.
So did this fight. Most people thought that Errol Spence Jr. versus Yordenis Ugas would likely be aired as a Fox pay-per-view because that's where Errol Spence Jr.'s last 2 pay-per-views took place on that network, and that's not the case.
Errol Spence Jr. and whatever his drawing power is wasn't enough to entice Fox to pick up his fight.
Don't misconstrue Fox's wavering commitment to the sport of boxing as coming from a lack of resources. Fox is a very big network with a lot of means and a lot of money. If they want to be in the Errol Spence Jr. business, they will be, but for some
He
reason...
didn't pick up his fight.
Make of that what you will. Dake Jonovan tweeted, Errol Spence brutally honest on stage when asked if he believes he can stop Yordenis Ugas April 16th. He said, we'll see. I don't think I've stopped anyone in a while. Notes that he added a nutritionist which has helped easier making the weight. Errol Spence Jr. hasn't actually stopped anyone, knocked anyone out since the Carlos Ocampo fight back in
June of 2018.
I don't think Errol Spence Jr. is the same fighter that he used to be way back when in 2018. A lot has happened since then. A car accident, a detached retina, and a whole lot of inactivity. And roughly Roughly the last 2 years, Errol Spence Jr. has fought only once. Just once.
At the end of 2020, over a year ago.
Let's not beat around the bush. You guys know that I've lost all hope of seeing a Terrence Crawford versus Errol Spence Jr. fight. Not that it matters, because in my eyes, the fight isn't now what it was then. Two prime unbeaten champions at the top of their game.
Errol might be damaged goods.
He might be, and I think Yordenis Ugas suspects that. I think he suspects as much, which is why he raised such a stink when the WBA ordered him to fight Montes Stanionis. He wanted to keep the way clear so he could unify with Errol Spence Jr., and he fought hard.
He may be catching Errol at an opportune time the same way he caught Manny at an opportune time.
The kickoff press conference for Spence versus Ugas took place the same day as the kickoff press conference for Canelo versus Bivol. Most boxing fans on social media, they were reacting to the Canelo versus Bivol fight, positively or negatively. Since then, most of the talk around the town has been centered around Canelo Alvarez, who he's fighting and who he's not fighting. For better or worse, that's what has dominated the conversation. Whereas Spence's press conference with Ugas, it didn't get that much attention. Not that many people are talking about. I mean, essentially what I'm getting at is Spence don't got the buzz now that he used to have.
Not a press conference for his fight happened in the shadow of Canelo's.
Good luck competing with that guy's metrics.
Guy doesn't need a high-profile dance partner to do good numbers, do big business.
This is a very important fight for Errol Spence Jr. I think it goes without saying. I think that the rest of Errol Spence Jr.'s career is on the other side of this fight. Whatever is left of Errol Spence Jr., we'll find out on April 16th. And where he goes from there, nobody knows, because he's been at welterweight for a long time, a very long time. He can't stay there forever, though at the same time, most people have lost hope of seeing that Spence versus Crawford fight, because it's not now what it was then.
If he actually beats Ugas, do we see the Crawford fight?
But does he chuck all three belts and move up to 154 pounds after the outcome of Charlo versus Castaño 2 is decided? That's the question.
There's a growing line of mandatory challenges that are going to want the winner of this fight.
The winner of Radzov Butaev versus Montes Stanionis, which is also on the undercard of this fight. The winner of Clayton versus Ennis by way of the WBA and the IBF.
There's a lot of uncertainty in Errol's future.